You know, it's kind of amazing when you think about it. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People,
Hmm.
when it first hit the shelves, they only printed like a few thousand copies. I guess no one, not even Carnegie himself, could have predicted just how massive it would become.
Right, a global phenomenon, and it's still going strong all these years later, almost a century.
It really speaks to something, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's like this deep down human need, this
Mhm.
yearning to connect, to really understand each other and just get along.
Totally. And that's exactly what we're going to be digging into today.
Yeah, a deep dive into this timeless classic, How to Win Friends and Influence People.
We're talking about the principles for building those rock-solid human relationships.
We've come through all the different editions, the first one going all the way back to 1937.
Wow, 1937.
To bring you the core, the real essence of what makes this book tick.
So think of this as your, fast track, right?
Your cheat sheet to wisdom.
To unlocking some seriously insightful stuff.
Timeless wisdom.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, the actual principles themselves, it's worth pausing for a second. Why did Carnegie even write this in the first place? It wasn't just a random, hey, I think I'll write a book kind of thing, right?
No, not at all. It came from a very real need. Back in the 1930s, University of Chicago, they teamed up with the YMCA schools, and they did this huge survey, really comprehensive. They talked to, well, basically every adult in this typical American town. And while, health was the number one concern, staying healthy, the second biggest thing people were interested in.
What was that?
Other people, figuring out other people, how to get along with them, how to be liked, how to get people on your side.
So there was this real hunger for this kind of knowledge. People were actively seeking it out.
Exactly. And what really surprised the researchers, the thing they didn't expect, there was no real practical guidebook for this stuff. Nothing that just laid it all out,
A how-to manual for human relationships.
Exactly. That's the gap Carnegie stepped in to fill. And he didn't just pull this out of thin air either. He had years of experience teaching public speaking, and he'd interviewed this incredible roster of successful people. Think Marconi, Edison, even Franklin D. Roosevelt.
Wow, some pretty big names there.
Oh, yeah. The top of their fields.
So for everyone listening, what we're doing today, our mission for this deep dive, we're distilling all that down.
Boiling it down to the essentials.
Extracting those core principles that can actually help you right here, right now, in your life.
Your social life, your work life.
We're talking about those same desires that the University of Chicago uncovered in that survey. How do we figure people out? How do we get them to, I don't know, like us?
And how do we bring them around to our way of thinking?
All right, let's dive in. Principle number 1, avoid criticism, condemnation, and complaining. It sounds straightforward, but Carnegie's got some pretty strong arguments against these. What's the main idea here?
Well, the big takeaway is that people hate being criticized. They really, really hate it. And they almost never think they're in the wrong.
Right.
Think about it. Carnegie starts off with these notorious criminals, right? Two-Gun Crowley, Al Capone. These guys were facing some serious consequences for their actions, and yet both of them, they just flat out refused to accept any blame.
I mean, that's almost hard to believe. But I guess it really highlights how much we naturally resist admitting we're wrong, huh?
Absolutely. And it's not just criminals either. Think about John Wanamaker, super successful businessman, right? He said he learned decades ago that scolding employees was totally useless. He realized, he had enough trouble managing his own faults. Why waste time focusing on everyone else's?
Yeah, that makes sense.
And it's not just about avoiding being a jerk either. It goes deeper than that. It's about understanding how we're wired. Psychologically, we're programmed to justify our actions.
Right.
We always have a reason, even if it's only in our own heads. And Lincoln's journey with this principle is actually really interesting. You mentioned earlier about his younger days when he was a bit more critical, a bit more sarcastic.
Yeah, what about that?
Well, when he was younger, he was known for his wit, but sometimes it could be pretty sharp. He'd even write these kind of cutting remarks and leave them around for people to find.
Ooh, that's harsh.
Yeah, and in one particular case, it actually created this resentment that lasted for years. But the thing is, later in life, he really learned the power of holding back. His letter to General Meade after the Battle of Gettysburg is a great example of this. Lee's army was in a really vulnerable position, and Lincoln was deeply, deeply disappointed that Meade didn't press the attack right away. I mean, he could have potentially ended the Civil War right then and there.
That's a huge missed opportunity.
It was. But even though Lincoln was clearly upset, his letter to Meade was actually pretty gentle. Like, he didn't tear into him or anything.
So how did he approach it?
He focused on the missed opportunity, the significance of what could have been, but he didn't attack Meade personally. It's a perfect example of how to communicate something difficult without being destructive.
Wow. That's some serious growth on Lincoln's part. And, the father forgets piece that Carnegie includes. It adds this really personal touch to this idea of not finding fault. What's the main takeaway from that, would you say?
I think Father Forgets is all about regret. This dad, he gets really angry at his son over some small stuff. And later, when he sees his kid sleeping peacefully, he's just overcome with love and remorse. It makes you realize how easy it is to slip into that criticizing mode and how often we expect too much, especially from those younger than us.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. So the big takeaway from this first principle.
I'd say it's this: criticizing, condemning, complaining. They're all counterproductive. They just put people on the defensive and make them less likely to change. Recognizing this, understanding how much people hate being criticized, that's the first step to better interactions.
Okay, so if we shouldn't be pointing out people's flaws, what's the alternative? Principle number 2, give honest and sincere appreciation. Carnegie even calls this the big secret of dealing with people. Why is that so effective? What's the psychology behind it?
I think it goes back to some pretty basic human needs. Like Freud talked about the desire to be great, and Dewey talked about the desire to be important. And those desires are powerful motivators. When you make someone feel valued, like they matter, you're fulfilling that need, and that makes them way more open to what you have to say.
So it's not just about being nice, it's about tapping into something deeper.
Exactly.
The story about Stan Novak and his son Tim, the one about kindergarten, that one really stuck with me. How did appreciation come into play there?
Oh, yeah. So Stan and his wife, they realized that forcing Tim to go to kindergarten just wasn't going to work. So they changed tactics. They started focusing on what would make kindergarten fun for Tim, talking about all the cool stuff he could do, like finger painting, making new friends. Basically, they focused on what he'd enjoy, what he'd appreciate, and it worked. He ended up being excited to go.
That's a great example. And that other story, the one about negotiating the hotel ballroom rent, that was another good illustration of understanding the other person's perspective, right? Like, what would they appreciate?
Totally. Instead of just complaining about the higher rent, Carnegie put himself in the hotel manager's shoes. He realized that his lectures, taking up the ballroom for like 20 nights, meant the hotel was missing out on other events that could bring in more money. Dances, conventions.
Stuff like that.
Exactly. So he made his case by appealing to the manager's desire for higher profits. And it worked. He got a discount without even explicitly saying, hey, I want a lower price.
Pretty clever.
It's all about figuring out what the other person wants and finding a way to align that with your own goals.
It reminds me of that Henry Ford quote, the one about the secret of success being the ability to get the other person's point of view.
It seems so obvious, right?
But, as Carnegie points out, we forget it all the time.
Yeah, we get caught up in our own heads.
And the examples he gives of what not to do, they're pretty eye-opening. Like that self-centered advertising agency letter and the one from the freight terminal superintendent, they're both just focused on their own needs, their own wants.
Completely ignoring the other person.
Yeah.
And then you have Barbara Anderson, who writes this amazing job application letter that's all about how she can benefit the banks she's applying to. And she gets like 11 interview offers out of 12.
Wow, that's impressive.
Yeah.
It really shows you the power of focusing on what the other person appreciates, what they value.
Totally. And that quote from Owen D. Young, the one about people who can put themselves in other people's shoes, never having to worry about the future, that really hits home, doesn't it?
It does. Like, that's a superpower for anyone who wants to succeed in life, right? Especially if your work involves dealing with people.
Absolutely. And Carnegie gives all these smaller examples that reinforce the same idea. Like the dad who realizes he needs to connect what he wants for his son to gain weight with what his son wants, or the guy who gets his daughter to eat breakfast by appealing to her desire to be like her mom.
It's about finding that common ground.
It is. Meeting the other person where they are.
It's funny, that statistic about I being the most frequently used word, that really does kind of highlight how self-centered we are by nature.
Oh, yeah. It's almost embarrassing, isn't it? But it's true. We're naturally focused on ourselves. And that quote from Alfred Adler, the one about people who aren't interested in others facing the biggest difficulties in life, it's a pretty sobering thought.
It is. And then you contrast that with someone like Theodore Roosevelt, who went out of his way to learn about a bobwhite simply because his valet's wife was curious about it.
It's those little gestures of genuine interest that really stick with people.
They show you care.
Exactly. And it doesn't have to be some grand gesture. Even just remembering someone's birthday or asking about their family, it goes a long way. And in a professional setting, think about that story about inviting those famous authors to speak. The guy who did it, he didn't just ask for a favor, he showed genuine admiration for their work. And guess what?
What?
They were more than happy to participate. It's about showing respect and making the other person feel valued. Like, remember Mrs. Rosedale? She stayed loyal to that bank for years simply because the manager showed genuine concern for her. And C.M. Naffel Jr., he was incredibly successful at selling fuel, and it all started because he asked for a favor and then genuinely took an interest in the other guy's business.
Those are great examples.
And then you have that really touching story about the student nurse who spends Thanksgiving with a lonely patient. Just a simple act of kindness, being present, being interested.
It really shows the power of connecting with people on a human level.
Absolutely. So that's principle number 2. Be genuinely interested in other people.
Makes sense. All right, principle number 3. Smile. It seems almost too simple. Like, does a smile really make that much of a difference?
You'd be surprised. A genuine smile can have a huge impact. We're not talking about a fake grin, the kind that doesn't reach your eyes. People can spot that a mile away. This is about a warm, authentic smile, one that comes from a place of genuine goodwill.
Got it.
Like Professor James V. McConnell, he had this interesting perspective. He said that people who smile tend to be more effective at managing others, at teaching, at selling things. They even raise happier kids.
Really?
And his point was, a smile conveys positivity and encouragement way more effectively than a frown or a neutral expression. It's like a nonverbal signal that says, hey, I'm glad you're here. And remember that story about the department store manager who preferred a smiling sales clerk with less education over a somber PhD?
Right.
Shows you how much value people place on a positive demeanor.
Yeah, it makes you more approachable, more likable.
Definitely. And it's not just face-to-face interactions either. Think about phone power. How a smile can actually come through in your voice.
I've heard about that.
Telephone companies actually train their employees to smile while they're talking on the phone.
Seriously.
Because a genuine smile creates a warmer, more friendly tone, even if the other person can't see you. It's about projecting that positivity.
Interesting.
And it ties into that observation from the rubber company chairman, the one about how people rarely succeed unless they enjoy what they're doing.
It's about bringing that positive energy to everything you do.
Right. And William Steinhardt, he actually made a conscious effort to smile more, and the results were pretty amazing. He admitted to being kind of a grumpy guy, barely acknowledging his wife in the mornings. But he decided to try smiling more, greeting her warmly, and he said it brought more happiness into their home in just 2 months than in the entire previous year.
Wow. So just a simple change in his facial expression.
Made a huge difference. And it didn't stop there. He started smiling at everyone, from the elevator operator to his colleagues. He also made a point of criticizing less and appreciating more, and he said it completely changed his life.
That's a pretty powerful testament to the power of a smile.
And there's that ancient Chinese proverb that goes, a man without a smiling face must not open a shop.
I like that.
It really gets at how important a welcoming expression is in any kind of interaction, especially business. A smile is like a universal sign of goodwill, It makes people feel better, especially if they're stressed or having a rush day. It's like a little ray of sunshine. Remember the department store's philosophy about the value of a smile at Christmas time?
Yeah, what was that?
They said a smile costs nothing, but it creates so much. It enriches both the giver and the receiver, and its memory can last a lifetime.
That's a beautiful sentiment. So principle number 3. All right, on to principle number 4. Remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language. Jim Farley, that guy had an incredible ability to remember names, right? What was it about that school that was so impactful?
Oh, man, Farley was legendary. He claimed he could remember the first names of tens of thousands of people. And this was back before computers and smartphones and all that. So it was all mental. And it played a big role in FDR's presidential campaign back in '32.
How so?
By remembering and using people's names, he made them feel seen, like they mattered. And that created this strong sense of connection, of loyalty. People felt like they had a personal link to FDR through Farley.
It's more than just remembering a label, isn't it? It's about acknowledging someone's individuality.
Exactly. Napoleon III, he understood this. He had this whole method for remembering names. If he didn't hear it clearly, he'd ask for it to be repeated and spelled. Then he'd repeat the name several times during the conversation, and he'd try to associate it with the person's appearance, like their hair color or something distinctive. And for really important people, he'd even write the name down and study it later.
Wow, that's commitment.
It's about going the extra mile to make someone feel special.
It makes me think of that Emerson quote, "Good manners are made up of petty sacrifices."
Yeah, that's a good one. Taking the time to remember someone's name, it seems like a small thing, but it can have a big impact.
Definitely. Remember that story about Ken Nottingham at the cafeteria?
Yeah.
The woman's name was Eunice, right?
Yeah, Eunice.
Yeah.
And just by using her name, it changed the whole interaction, went from being this cold, transactional thing to something warmer, more personal, and she actually gave him better service because of it.
It's amazing how much a name can matter.
It's personal. It's tied to our identity, you know? Using someone's name, it shows respect. It makes the communication more meaningful, whether you're talking to a server or a CEO. So principle number 4, remember that a person's name is to that person the sweetest and most important sound in any language.
All right, moving on to principle number 5. Be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves.
Yeah.
This seems pretty fundamental to building any kind of rapport, wouldn't you say? What's the key takeaway here?
Well, it's all about making people feel valued and important, which, as we've seen, is huge. When you really listen to someone, when you show genuine interest in what they have to say, you make them feel good.
Yeah.
And that makes them more open to you, to your ideas.
Okay.
Carnegie tells this great story about a dinner party where he spent the whole evening listening to this botanist talk about plants.
Plants.
Yeah, plants. And Carnegie himself barely said a word, but later, the host described him as a most interesting conversationalist. And the thing is, Carnegie was genuinely interested in what the botanist had to say. He was fully present, actively listening.
It reminds me of that saying, to be interesting, be interested.
Exactly. And you know, Charles W. Eliot, the former president of Harvard, he said, exclusive attention to the person who is speaking to you is very important. Nothing else is so flattering as that. And there's this description of Eliot's listening style that I love. Apparently, he would listen with this intense focus, like he was absorbing every word, not just with his ears, but with his eyes, too.
That's a great image.
And remember that story about Mr. Detmer and the angry customer?
The one who was ranting about a debt he didn't actually owe?
Yeah, that one. Mr. Detmer just let the guy vent. He didn't interrupt or argue, even though he knew the customer was wrong. And you know what? Not only did the guy eventually pay his bill, he ended up placing a bigger order and becoming a good friend.
So just by listening.
Mr. Detmer turned a hostile situation into a positive one.
Pretty amazing. And that story about the Western Union office boy, the one who educated himself by listening to and corresponding with famous people, that's pretty inspiring too.
Oh, yeah. He used his listening skills as a way to learn and connect with the world. He built relationships with some seriously influential figures just by being a good listener and showing genuine interest.
It shows you the power of being curious, of actively seeking out knowledge from others.
Definitely. And, you know, even Sigmund Freud, the father of psychoanalysis, was known for being an incredible listener. People felt like he really heard them, understood them. And then you have Dr. Nicholas Murray Butler. He said that people who only talk about themselves are hopelessly uneducated. Pretty strong words.
They are. So the main point here is to ask questions that genuinely interest the other person, to encourage them to share their thoughts and feelings and experiences.
Exactly. Remember, people are way more interested in themselves than they are in you.
Sure enough.
Like, remember that bread salesman who was struggling until he started asking the baker about his interests?
Yeah, and Edward E. Harriman, he got a job by focusing on the other guy's passions.
Right. It's all about making the other person feel like the most important person in the room.
Even for just a little while.
Even for a little while, like that teacher who made Chris, the shy student, feel valued by moving him to a more advanced class. It made him feel seen, like his abilities were recognized. So, principle number 5, be a good listener. Encourage others to talk about themselves.
All right, principle number 6 builds on that idea. Talk in terms of the other person's interests.
Seems like a natural progression, right?
Yeah, totally. Once you've taken the time to listen and understand what someone is truly interested in, you can tailor your conversation to really resonate with them. Like, remember that story about the Connecticut attorney who inherited his aunt's Packard?
Yeah, the one who just happened to mention how much he admired her possessions.
Right. He wasn't
Right.
trying to butter her up or anything. He was genuinely interested in her and the things that were important to her, and it ended up benefiting him in a big way.
Interesting. And James Adamson, he got that huge order from George Eastman by talking about his office and his philanthropy. Exactly. He connected with Eastman on a personal level by showing interest in things that Eastman was clearly passionate about. It wasn't just a business transaction, it was about building a relationship. And remember, Claude Murray, the restaurant owner, he was able to keep a really valuable employee by showing genuine appreciation for her work and making her feel like an essential part of the team.
So the bottom line is to talk about things that the other person cares about.
Exactly. Find that common ground, that shared interest, and use it to build a connection.
Now we're getting into part 3 of the book, which is all about winning people to your way of thinking. Principle number 7 is a big one. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely. It seems to build on a lot of the ideas we've already talked about, but it takes it a step further. What's the crucial element here?
Sincerity. It can't be fake, you know? It has to be genuine. It's not about flattering people or trying to manipulate them. It's about truly recognizing and valuing them for who they are. Carnegie starts this section by talking about how pointless arguments are. He says that most arguments end with both sides just digging in their heels, becoming even more convinced that they're right. And, you know, Patrick J. O'Hare, the salesman, he actually learned to avoid arguments altogether.
How do you do that?
He started by agreeing with potential buyers, even if he didn't completely agree.
Interesting. So it's more about building trust and rapport than winning a debate.
Exactly. It's about putting the relationship first.
It's like that Ben Franklin quote, right? The only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
Exactly. And there's that little poem about William J., the one who died right, but still dead. It's kind of funny, but it makes a good point. Like, what's the point of being right if you lose everything else in the process? And remember Mr. Parsons, the one who had that run-in with the tax inspector. He completely diffused the situation by shifting the focus and offering sincere appreciation. And that car dealership manager, the one who dealt with those angry customers by just admitting the dealership's mistakes, he was way more successful than if he'd tried to argue or defend himself.
Yeah, it's about taking responsibility and showing empathy. Right.
Totally. And that quote from James Harvey Robinson about how much we hate being told we're wrong, how we rationalize our beliefs, that really explains why arguments are so often a dead end.
We all want to protect our egos.
We do. It's human nature. And, you know, Ben Franklin had this rule. He avoided directly contradicting people. Instead, he used more modest language, more agreeable language. And remember that story about the mounted policeman in the park? The one who diffused a potentially volatile situation by staying calm and understanding. It's all about de-escalating, about finding common ground.
So avoiding arguments is key.
It's huge. And even when you do make a mistake, sometimes the best thing you can do is just own up to it.
Like that architect who admitted his error and ended up getting more work.
Exactly. There's something satisfying about admitting when you're wrong. It can actually open up opportunities for problem solving and collaboration.
And it shows humility, which I think people respect.
Definitely. And, you know, that reference to Pickett's charge, that military maneuver during the Civil War, it was brilliant in theory, but it failed miserably. It's a good analogy for how being right doesn't always guarantee success. Sometimes you have to prioritize relationships and goodwill over being technically correct. Like, remember that story about the dad who admitted he was wrong to his son?
Yeah, and how that led to a reconciliation.
Right. And John D. Rockefeller Jr., his speech to those striking miners is a perfect example of winning people over by making them feel heard and respected. He didn't try to argue or force his point of view. He appealed to their sense of fairness and understanding.
I imagine an argumentative approach would have just backfired in that situation.
Totally. And all those smaller examples, like negotiating a lower rent, getting your car fixed without a hassle, they all point to the same thing. Avoiding conflict is often the best way to get what you want. And that story about GBR, the guy who got that big contract even though he lost his voice, that shows how strong relationships can lead to unexpected support. So, principle number 7, the only way to get the best of an argument is to avoid it.
Makes sense. And this idea of making others feel important, it goes beyond just avoiding arguments, doesn't it? It's about actively making them feel valued in all your interactions.
Absolutely. You know that saying, we want our friends to excel us? It sounds counterintuitive, but it's true.
How so?
When people feel important, appreciated, it strengthens the relationship.
Okay.
Like Henrietta Gia, the one who worked at the personnel agency. She became super popular just by letting her colleagues talk about their accomplishments.
So it's about making them feel good about themselves.
Exactly. And Mr. Selt, he found that genuinely asking his employees for their input about what they wanted led to way more cooperation. And Eugene Wesson, the guy who was trying to sell those sketches, he had no luck until he started asking the buyer for his opinion, making him feel involved in the process.
It's about making people feel like their thoughts and opinions matter.
It is. And even something as simple as planning a vacation with your kid, making sure it's aligned with their interests.
Yeah.
It makes them feel important, like they're part of the decision-making process.
Right.
And remember that Emerson quote, the one about recognizing our own rejected thoughts when they reappear in the brilliance of others.
Yeah, it's a good one.
It's a reminder to stay open to other people's ideas, to make them feel heard and valued. Like Colonel Edward M. House, he was super influential, and his method was to subtly guide President Wilson while making him feel like the ideas were his own. And that story about the guy choosing the sales organization that allowed him to sell himself, it shows how much people prefer to feel like they're in control, like they're making their own choices. And Lao Tzu, that ancient Chinese philosopher, he said, the highest type of ruler is one of whose existence the people are barely aware. Like, true leadership is about empowering others, not dominating them.
Makes sense.
And remember Sam Douglas, the one who realized how much his wife appreciated him just complimenting her garden? Or that example about putting out the fire, how instead of ordering the boys around, it was more effective to make a suggestion and appeal to their sense of responsibility.
Right, right.
It's all about thinking from the other person's perspective before you speak or act.
Now, you mentioned earlier about that magic phrase, the one about not blaming people for feeling the way they do.
I don't blame you one iota for feeling as you do. If I were you, I would undoubtedly feel just as you do.
That's a mouthful.
It is. But it's powerful. It instantly creates the sense of empathy, of validation. You're acknowledging that the other person's feelings are legitimate, and that disarms them. It's like you're saying, hey, I get it. I'd feel the same way if I were in your shoes. And, even thinking about someone like Al Capone, acknowledging that given the same circumstances, anyone could have ended up like him. It forces you to see things from a different perspective.
It's about having compassion, even for people who've done bad things.
Exactly. Carnegie encourages us to try to understand those who are irritable or unreasonable. He says that most people are desperate for sympathy, for someone to just listen and understand.
And that story about the Louisa May Alcott broadcast, when you accidentally played the wrong thing and that listener called in furious.
Oh, yeah.
What did you do?
Instead of arguing or trying to defend myself, I just apologized sincerely. And it worked. She calmed down immediately.
It's amazing how far a sincere apology can go.
It really is. And think about President Taft. He had that encounter with that persistent mother, and he was able to handle it gracefully by delaying his response and then being polite and understanding. And Jay Mangum, he got that hotel manager to cooperate with those escalator repairs by understanding the manager's concerns and priorities. And Mrs. Norris, she convinced her piano student to trim her nails by framing it as the student's own decision and then praising her for making the sacrifice.
That's clever.
It's about making people feel good about doing what you want them to do. And Mr. Hurock, he handled Chaliapin's cancellations with sympathy and understanding, which actually helped to smooth things over. And John D. Rockefeller Jr., he appealed to nobler motives when he was dealing with the issue of his kids' photos being published. And Cyrus H.K. Curtis, he got Louisa May Alcott to agree to something by appealing to her charitable nature. And even those steps for dealing with the dissatisfied customer, they all emphasize listening, apologizing, understanding, and ultimately letting the customer feel like they're in control. So, principle number 7, it's a big one. Make the other person feel important and do it sincerely.
All right, on to principle number 8. Dramatize your ideas. What's this all about?
It's about going beyond just stating facts. People are way more likely to remember something if it's presented in a vivid, engaging way.
Like a story.
Exactly, or a demonstration, or something that appeals to their emotions. Like, remember Jim Yemens, the guy who was selling those new cash registers? He didn't just talk about how much money businesses were losing with their old registers. He threw pennies into the trash to demonstrate his point.
Wow, that's a pretty dramatic way to make a point.
And it worked.